Well,
New South Wales Auditor General released a somewhat scathing report into education for failing to address the city versus country divide in education. And of course, today, the NAPLAN results were released showing 1 in 3 school students are not meeting numeracy and literacy expectations. And on top of all of that, the ABC's education reporter, Connor Duffy, has also been looking at what appears to be the growing incidence of students basically refusing to go to school, not going to school. So what on earth is going on with our education system? And what can we do to fix it? You know, just the person to ask. Dr. David Roy is a lecturer in education. I don't know why he's laughing at the moment. Dr. David Roy is a lecturer in education at the University of Newcastle and joins me now while chortling there in the background. Good afternoon, Dr. Roy.
Good afternoon. And I'm just a bit concerned about this, that we know how to fix it. I think there are things that can be done, but there is no magic bullet, as it were.
Well, before we look on to what could be done, let's look at the issue as it stands. Senate figures show that school attendance has dropped from just under 91%, 90.9% in 2021. Interestingly, that was during COVID, to 86.5% in 2022.
Yeah.
What do you take from those figures?
Well, that's actually quite a large drop. And it's great to see that federal, and we know state governments are deeply concerned about this. It shows they care. So I'm going to be taking quite a positive approach with this report, or the Senate recommendations that have come through and the reactions of the politicians, and what will be the reactions of the education authorities across the board, because they are concerned, because they care. This is concerning because we don't know where these kids are. That's the difference. There are lots of reasons that people can't attend, but the real one that we're concerned about is what is called school refusal. And not just normal absences, but these are children who are with their family members are just not going to school.
What are the reasons behind that?
Well, a lot of the reasons that are being given is to do with safety, whether it's mental safety or personal safety. The kids just do not feel secure going to school. It could be linked to bullying. For some, it's to do with disability, and they don't feel their needs are being met. And they are not comfortable in the school environment. And that, to me, is deeply concerning, particularly as someone who both will be quite harsh within school systems when asked, but also someone who knows how much teachers and schools actually really care about their kids. And I know this is going to break the hearts of the majority of teachers to know that there are an increasing number of kids who just don't want to leave. COVID has been a factor, but I think there's other factors going on as well.
Those two things you cited there before, there's been so much work done on bullying to get that out of schools.
Yeah.
There's been so much work done on making sure that schools are an inclusive space, an inclusive place. And yet we still have figures like this. Are we doing something wrong in those policies? Do they need to be rethought? Because if the outcome is people still are feeling dissatisfied or scared or for whatever reason aren't going to school, do we have to go back one step and look at the policies themselves?
I think we actually have to look at society. This is not just a school issue. This is a community issue. And the part of the recommendations that they're giving is to say that we need to be engaging with all the stakeholders, with psychologists, with OTs. We've got to be looking at community support and mental health support, as well as supporting the skills within the schools. And making sure that we are actually being more inclusive. Because while we deal with some issues such as bullying, and there's been some amazing step forwards within that, there are areas that we are not inclusive, that we are still, and the United Nations tells us this, we're not inclusive with disability. We do have units and we have segregated settings. And to be honest, those are sometimes the best settings for the kids because the actual mainstream school is not built to be inclusive. And we don't fund it, we don't staff it in the way that would make it inclusive. We instead, as I've said before, we invest in other areas, such as Pat Conroy announced, our local federal MP, Tomahawk missiles. I'm not saying whether we should or shouldn't do that, but we're not investing in education the way we should be to make sure that people feel included, feel safe and want to go to school.
You mentioned COVID before.
Yeah.
A highly disruptive period, particularly for our young.
Mm-hmm.
What was and continues to be the impact on school attendance of the lockdowns?
Well, the impact for some was that they found themselves safer at home. Not just because of COVID, but just in the way that they learn. They didn't like being in the classroom situation with the stresses within that. It's why there's been such a rise in homeschooling, which is official homeschooling, where you officially leave the mainstream and you apply through NESA to actually homeschool at home, which is a big sacrifice on families. And that's gone up by 39% in the past year. And significantly,
that's a huge figure.
Huge figure. And the three areas which have the largest increase are Sydney West, which is a massive growth area, but the Hunter region comes second. The Central Coast comes third. So we are gaining in the number of people who are officially homeschooling. The school refusal, it's not homeschooling. That's just not going to school.
Right.
And for the kids wanting to be isolated in their space. And we're seeing that even with the way our kids who do go to school are much more isolated and want to be and want to. I see it in our students at the university that they engage, they like the online learning. They in some ways aren't used to being with others. And that whole socialization community seems to have broken down partly through COVID, through the use of social media, all of that together.
What is it about the Hunter? Why are we so high on that list? You, of course, work here. You're at the University of Newcastle. You know the Hunter as the education space very well. Why would the Hunter be so high on that list for homeschooling?
I think one of the reasons is we are such a diverse grouping within the Hunter. It's why we make a great research base to have, because we have every type of social, economic, ethnicity, background of individuals here. We really are a beautiful snapshot of the wider Australia community. And so if we see that there's an increase in homeschooling across Australia, we're definitely going to see it in the Hunter. We will be one of the standouts for that. So that is one of the reasons for it, because we also have the opportunity, we have the resources here to allow parents to teach their kids from home. But part of the recommendations going back to this committee is they're not really sure why people are refusing. We know it's happening in the UK as well. We know it's happening in the United States. So this is happening across the board in English-speaking countries, and we need to work out why. And one of the best things they're doing in these recommendations is, and it's their first one, is let's find out why.
Until we find out why, is there anything that can be done to address it?
Not really. Well, yes, we can start to take back our records. We've not been chasing up kids about attendance. Each organisation, so whether it be the Catholic, systemic schools, independent schools, the Department of Education schools, they all look at their own kind of figures. But if someone leaves to go to a different system, they don't really chase it up. And there's no one really taking responsibility for that. It used to be more to do with the Department of Education. It's not so much. So no one really knows where these kids are, and no one's chasing after it. No one ever gets prosecuted for not sending your kid to school. Technically, you're breaking the law. Now, part of me is quite glad about that, because just using a stick rather than a carrot won't change things. We've got to do both. And again, these recommendations, and that's why I'm actually being positive about policy here and something coming out of politics, and I don't often do that. One of the things that's good is they're saying we've got to have a nuanced approach to this and not, as you said, stigmatise it.
You mentioned this as a community issue before. Yeah. It's not just a policy, governmental or education sector issue. So from a community point of view, or let's be more pointed, from a parental point of view or a carer's point of view, what can they do? For all of those parents listening right now, or carers going, well, I'm in this situation, but what can I do? I can't force him or her out the door.
I'll give the advice that I was given when I did my mental health first aid training, which I recommend to everyone to do, is that resourceful people use resources. So you reach out, you speak to allied health professionals, you speak to your neighbours, you speak to the school, you speak to psychologists, you speak to your local GP, you speak to people and say, have you got advice? What can I do? How can I get help? Because that's what parents need. They need help because they love their kids and they want their kids to feel mentally safe. They want their kids to also learn and engage in the wider community. And their kids are not wanting to do that. And so the parents need help. You don't get a handbook when you get given a baby. You have to learn on your feet. If you have extended family, it's wonderful. But in a country like us in Australia, where there's people like myself who came from abroad, if you can't tell from my accent, you don't have that extended family. So therefore, you need support of your community. And that's why we need to get back to that village mentality.
Dr. David Roy, lecturer in education at the University of Newcastle. Always good to speak with you. And see, you almost solved it for us. Almost. So that initial laugh, that was misplaced.
There will be solutions. Supporting our teachers, supporting our schools, getting more teachers into schools, which is why the university now has the one-year graduate diploma, which is going to move things faster. Having lovely, safe environments, applying the quality teaching framework to create that for kids, that will help as well.
Thanks so much, mate. Dr. David Roy there, lecturer in education at the University of Newcastle.